Welcome back to Coach Bill's Sports Show. As always, I'm Coach Bill. It's your first time with us. Thank you for joining us. Do a little bit of college sports around here. Try to keep it open. Try to keep it fun. All the good stuff. So, Wednesday's show. Wednesdays are for the rankings. So, let's go ahead and dive in. Boom. All right. So, we have our own algorithm here. It's an ever-evolving algorithm. The more I see, the more I can build around it, figure stuff out. So, weekly we start with some honorable mentions. Let's go ahead and get into them. First up, we got Penn State, then South Carolina, Baylor, Minnesota, and Arkansas. Penn State dropped pretty far after a road loss to Michigan. But I don't think they're completely out of that race yet, with Ohio State still ahead. But after the Ohio State game, I think Penn State's pretty much out of that picture, and they're just playing for better bowl position. Arkansas, big win on the road against BYU. BYU was one of the teams I was a little heavier on early on in the season. So, some good wins from some of our honorable mentions. Next up, we got 25-21. So sitting there at 25, we got Liberty, then LSU, Oklahoma, Mississippi State, and Purdue. Mississippi State's got a horrible matchup against Alabama this week, coming off of a loss. Alabama is a horrible team to play. LSU's got a big matchup as well against Ole Miss. That's one of my underdogs this week that I'm kind of feeling. We'll talk about that on the Friday show. But LSU is one of those that depending on which team shows up, they can be really, really good, and they can surprise some people. So keep an eye on LSU here. Let's go ahead and get into 20-16. So at 20, we got Texas Tech. 19, we got Illinois. 18, we got Texas. And 17, Oregon. 16, the Syracuse Orange. Syracuse Orange travel down to our friends down the hill in Clemson. So, big game for them this week. So, I don't want to say they don't really have a chance, but it's going to be a tough game for Syracuse this week. Tough game. But if they win it, I could definitely see them bouncing much higher into the rankings. Speaking of the next ones up, let's go into 15-11. So we have USC, Wake Forest, Kentucky, Kansas State, and UCLA. UCLA and USC seem pretty destined on a collision course for one of the two spots for the Pac-12 championship, because they do based off of record instead of based off of divisions. So they could actually play each other twice this year, once on November 19th in the regular scheduled game, and then once again for the championship. Wake Forest is another team that's just hanging around there in the ACC, upper echelons of the ACC. Really fun team to watch if you haven't gotten to watch them. Kentucky's got a big matchup. They got a bye week this week, but they got a big matchup coming into Knoxville, Tennessee next week. So, something to look ahead for Kentucky. Let's go ahead and break into the top 10, though. We got Oklahoma State at number 10. Oklahoma State lost in a very, very, very tight game with TCU. And I don't want to take a lot away from the TCU win, but Oklahoma State's quarterback didn't play at all, or didn't practice at all that week, and came out and played, and they played it a tight game. I think if there's some stuff that needs to get cleaned up, but I think if Oklahoma State can win out, they have a chance at their championship game. Another team that has a chance at the championship game, even with two losses, Utah at number 9. Big win against USC. And once again, their division does it by the two highest ranked. So if UCLA can beat USC, it pushes them into 2 losses in conference, where Utah only has 1 loss in conference right now. So there's some finite points in that one where Utah can actually make their Pac-12 championship game still. Potential matchup for them in the Rose Bowl in Ohio State. Ohio State had a bye week last week. The reason Ohio State's this far down in the rankings, though, is 100% based on who they've played, because they really haven't played anybody. Early game against Notre Dame just keeps looking like a worse and worse game, and they haven't really been able to show off against a lot of people. They do have a trip to Happy Valley and Penn State up ahead, and then they have their annual Michigan game, but they haven't, outside of those 2 games, they haven't really played anybody, whereas everybody above them has already played multiple ranked teams. So number 7, Ole Miss. So Ole Miss is actually on upset alert for me this week. Like I said, we'll get into that in the Friday show. Their offense is really good. I'm just waiting to see how they look on the road, because all their big games so far have been at home. So I want to see an Ole Miss team on the road against an LSU team that is, if you take away the outlier, which is the Tennessee game, they've been a consistently good team this year in LSU. Tennessee was able to put it on them, but as we've seen, Tennessee's offense is one of the best in the nation. So I'll be very curious to watch that LSU Ole Miss game. If Ole Miss can pull it out, it sets up a big game a couple weeks away for Ole Miss versus Alabama for essentially the SEC West. So big games ahead. Talking about big games and big wins. Next up, we got TCU pulling off a big old win to stay undefeated, beating Oklahoma State in double overtime, I believe it was. Yeah, it was double overtime. TCU, they just have one of those teams that just won't quit. They have probably, if he's not the best wide receiver in the nation, he's a top 3 wide receiver. And their quarterback is just, he's aggressive when he needs to be. He's conservative when he needs to be. Something you'll see that's very consistent with the top echelons of these teams is the quarterback play. With the exception of maybe Michigan, who is up next, pretty much all these teams have a quarterback that can go win them games. I say with the exception of Michigan because so far it's been that run game. Michigan ran for over 400 yards against Penn State and just kind of played keep away. Some of that was the quarterback running. I will not take that away from him. But when you're a run-based offense and playing defense, can you really compete with the quarterbacks that are in this grouping? TCU's quarterback, he'll throw it all over the yard. Many people are down on Stetson Bennett, but the dude's a national championship winning quarterback. You got Bryce Young, who's probably going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. Hendon Hooker, who is phenomenal. You got DJ Ungia. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. You got DJ at Clemson, who, he's come out this year and really shown some people why he was so highly recruited, why he was so highly touted coming out of high school. And then you've got C.J. Stroud for Ohio State that they've still got to see. So there's a lot of talent up here at quarterback, and Michigan's the one team where I just don't know. Are they that talented at quarterback? But let's get into the top 4, our current playoff teams. Whoops, wrong way. There we go. Number 4, we got Georgia. Georgia's another team. They played some stiffer competition beginning of the year, but they've kind of hit a lull in their schedule where they don't have much. Now, that's going to change because Tennessee is coming into town 3 weeks from now in a potential top 4 matchup. So we'll see how that works out for Georgia and Tennessee in that game. That is, in my opinion, that will be the deciding game for the SEC East. One of the team that I have currently still coming out of the SEC West to face the SEC East winner is Alabama. Yes, Alabama lost at Tennessee. That game was historic, and I'll never take anything away from that game. I do think there's a lot still on the plate for Alabama, and I do think a healthier Alabama is going to be a lot harder to play. And an Alabama that can watch that game tape, again, is going to be tougher to play. So a potential rematch between Alabama and Tennessee in the SEC Championship is possible. Rematch between Alabama and Georgia in the SEC Championship, which is a repeat of last year's, is possible as well. So there's a lot that can still go on for Alabama, but they got to get there. They've got to win. This week they've got Mississippi State, ranked team, and then Ole Miss is still on their schedule as well. So there's some stuff they've got to be able to do. Another team that's just got to keep winning, Clemson. Honestly, I think Syracuse is probably the last real test for Clemson this year before the playoffs. And if they dominate Clemson like they have been dominating some teams recently, for those of you who looked at the points and didn't watch the game itself, this past weekend, Florida State scored 14 points in essentially what was garbage time, which made it a lot closer of a game. On paper, it wasn't really that close. It was 35-14 until the garbage time points were scored. So Clemson's been dominating some people, dominating some teams. They've been looking really good, playing ranked teams pretty well. Like I said, Syracuse is pretty much their last test of the season. They have a few games here and there, but nothing that's really going to challenge them like Syracuse is. So if they can get past the Orange this week for homecoming, it's essentially a race to the playoffs for them. Hopefully, a team that they will see in the playoffs. My number one team right now, coming off a historically big win, University of Tennessee. University of Tennessee has just been doing stuff this year that, as a Tennessee fan, as a college football fan, I haven't seen in a while. Offensively, the number one offense in the nation. They've been putting up points without their number one wide receiver. Been able to interchange a couple linemen and still be fairly dominant. When their right tackle is able to shut down, I don't want to say shut down. When the right tackle is able to contain Will Anderson, who is a top 5 pick and probably one of the most scary defensive ends I've seen in a minute. There's a lot of talent on this team, and it's just scratching the surface for Tennessee. Yes, the portal has happened, but a lot of this team is the same players that Pruitt had 2 years ago, and wasn't able to do a lot with them. So Tennessee is in one of those echelons where they're climbing back up the hill, and they've still got stuff to do. I'm not saying Tennessee's perfect. A lot of Tennessee's success right now relies on Hendon Hooker and him not making bad decisions and their ability to run the ball. Under Coach Heupel, if they break 90 yards in a game rushing, they're undefeated. It's when they give up on the run that Tennessee loses. So if they break 90 yards, they're undefeated. If you get under 90 yards you can keep them under 90 yards, you can beat Tennessee. They are beatable. There's a lot of, I don't want to say there's a lot of holes, but there's some holes there at Tennessee. Now the problem is, can you exploit them? A, and B, can you keep pace with that offense to exploit them? And that's a big question right now. especially with their number one, Cedric Tillman, coming back. I don't know if it's this week or against Kentucky, but the team is getting better. Team is getting very, very good right now. They've beaten 4 ranked teams, which is why they're as high as they are. 6-0, just some really good football being played by the University of Tennessee right now. So we have some tiers set up. So right now, this is how the tiers are kind of breaking down. Obviously, these change weekly, because if you watch last week's, some of these are very much different, and we had a couple more tiers. But these are the ones that are kind of really separating themselves right now. So right now, the playoff teams are Tennessee, Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia. Yes, that would be 3 SEC teams in the playoff. I think some of that fixes itself because you got Tennessee and Georgia still yet to play. Michigan and Ohio State still have to play, which are both on the list here. So there's a lot of balancing that's coming into this. So we'll just see. We'll see how this all shakes down. But Tennessee, Clemson, Alabama, Georgia. On the outside looking in is Michigan, TCU, and Ole Miss. All of them have big wins. But do they have enough big wins to get into it? I think Michigan needs to beat Ohio State to get in. I think Ole Miss needs to beat Alabama to get in. TCU still has a couple more wins they need. They definitely need to win their conference, the Big 12, to get in. Those would still have a chance for Ohio State, Utah, Oklahoma State, and UCLA. Oklahoma State still has a chance. UCLA is undefeated right now. They beat Utah. If they beat USC and then whoever they play in the conference championship and they win that game, there's a chance they could still make it. Ohio State, it essentially comes down to Penn State and Michigan for them. They win those games, Ohio State's probably going to be in the playoff. But from what I've seen from them, if they make the playoffs, it might be a one and done, especially depending on who they match up with. Ohio State hasn't shown a lot of ability to keep up with a fast offense. So if Ohio State matches up with Alabama or Tennessee, that's a lot more of a dangerous matchup than it is maybe a Georgia, where they're comfortable with more of a grinding game. So it's still an interesting season. We still got some time left. There's a lot left to do. We're just now in the middle of October. So we still got November. We still got December for some games, for the championship games and everything. So there's some time left. But right now, if we called it today, these are the 4 teams I think will make the playoffs. Tennessee at 1, playing Georgia at 4, and then Clemson and Alabama playing on the other side. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff down below. If you think there's a team I've overlooked, you think there's a team I'm low on, let me know. Put it down in the comments. Let's have a discussion. I can run you through my numbers. Maybe there's something I'm missing. We can always make this better. We can always build this bigger. So any help you can give us is exactly what we're looking for. So once again, thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Ready, break.